A recent ruling from the New Mexico Supreme Court could fundamentally change political redistricting in the state. The justices weighed in on a lawsuit brought by the state Republican Party and others, challenging the new congressional districts drawn by the Democrat-controlled state legislature. Their order sends the case back to district court in Clovis, but the Supreme Court's decision could impact another case too, a lawsuit brought by the Navajo Nation against San Juan County commissioners. Now, the tribe accuses commissioners of packing Native American voters into a single district, limiting their voting power in a county where Native Americans make up 40% of the population. New Mexico in Focus political correspondent Gwyneth Dolan caught up with two people familiar with these cases. Hannah Burling from Fair Districts, New Mexico, and Leonard Gorman of the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission. As they explain, each of these lawsuits could make a significant impact in future elections.
My guests today are Leonard Gorman with the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission and Hannah Burling, who heads up Fair Districts, New Mexico. Hannah, I want to ask you this. Political junkies, partisans, they just want to know one thing about what's happening in this game called redistricting. Is this a decisive win for Republicans in New Mexico or no?
No, because we don't have the opinion yet. We have the order, but as far as I know, we don't have the written opinion. So it's not a decisive victory. It is going back to the district judge.
And then, but this acceptance of the case, this determination that the Supreme Court make to send it back to the district court with some advice, does that mean, is that an endorsement that the Republicans claim that Democrats unfairly politically gerrymandered the state's 3 congressional districts? Does this decision say there's merit to that?
This decision says that that can be examined, that claim can be examined. And the fascinating thing to us is that they are asking the district judge to use Justice Kagan's 3 criteria in her written dissent in 2019 in Rucho.
All right. And what are those 3 points?
Well, the 3 points are: first, was this deliberate partisan gerrymandering? Second, did it succeed?
Yeah.
And third, was there any other reason for drawing the lines in that way?
Leonard Gorman, you have participated in redistricting in all of the states that the Navajo Nation occupies. You've been through several cycles. You've seen a lot of this. Is there a lot of partisan gerrymandering going on in redistricting in the Four Corners area in this past cycle? Did you see that?
Yes, there's a lot of political gamesmanship in redistricting. It's a part of the wheels that turn when we talk about redistricting. There's partisanship in all different angles, the Republican, the Democrats, the independents. And on the Arizona side, the Independent Redistricting Commission is made up of the 3 major political parties, the Republicans, Democrats, and independent. And on the New Mexico side, the same situation. In Utah, the same circumstance that affect the redrawing of maps, even to the local level. So that's a part of the dynamics of redistricting.
As the state redistricts for congressional seats and for legislative seats, there's also redistricting, and sometimes we forget about this, in cities and counties and other bodies, right? So what does your lawsuit say that the San Juan County Commission did wrong?
You know, I think at the height of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, I recall, for example, in 2011, it was a very important and instrumental basis of redistricting. And one of them was the Section 5 preclearance. And I recall specifically when Navajo Nation participated in these discussions on redistricting in all the 3 states and at the county level. People that drew lines, approved those lines, had the responsibility to listen to the Navajo Nation at that time.
Because, let me just interrupt you to recap, because preclearance meant that the Department of Justice had review power over those plans before they were put into place, right?
Yes, before any election laws that relate to voting became or implemented in those areas, in those jurisdictions. But of course, since that time, there has been a downward spiral on the chipping away at the 1965 law. In June of 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court brought down the pre-clearance requirement, saying that it's outdated. And I think that was the fear and the anticipation of the most recent decision in the Milligan case, that the current sitting U.S. Supreme Court would further dilute the strength of the U.S. Voting Rights Act.
So in this case with San Juan County, you're saying that the commissioners unfairly packed Navajo voters into districts that would reduce their ability to elect more commissioners. Are the seats on that commission now apportioned fairly? Have they been in the past, or have Navajo voters in that area not been represented fairly on the commission, in your opinion?
I think the Milligan case is a very good example of what the Navajo Nation is litigating in New Mexico, San Juan County. It's a clearly accurate reflection of what's going on in the county. And as you can tell from the way the case evolved all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And that's where in those areas, the minorities sought the second district that they believe could be designed to elect another candidate of their choice. Similarly here, the litigation that the Navajo Nation believes that there is an opportunity for the second district to where that Navajos can elect a candidate of their choice.
Right. Hannah, I want to come back to you and the case that the Supreme Court sent back to a judge in the conservative southeastern part of the state. You think that this decision from the New Mexico State Supreme Court is the least partisan decision?
I do believe that. And
Why?
I believe that it is because it is, first of all, the Republicans have not won a victory. I'm not going to speak to the merits of that case. I don't believe I'm qualified. But they are going to have their complaints examined. And they are going to be examined under Justice Kagan's criteria.
So you think this is the best thing that could happen for voters in New Mexico of all parties?
Yes, I do. I do believe that. I believe that voters in all parties frequently feel that their voice is not heard, their votes don't count, and that it is deliberate on the part of those who have other beliefs. We are a very divided nation at this point.
So the process of this district judge going through and examining what the New Mexico State Legislature did in drawing up that, in approving those districts, that process will bring to light, do you think it will impact voters' perception of the integrity of the system and the fairness of the process?
I hope that it will. I see this as offering a real chance for voters to understand that, and I'm hoping that voters will be given enough clarity on this subject to get that. The maps that the Citizens Redistricting Committee drew were very good maps, but they were changed by the legislature. And we think there's an inherent conflict of interest when elected officials can draw their own districts. The other problem was that the CRC, while they worked very, very hard, they went all over the state, they took a ton of public input. There were 7 members. There was no one from any of the sovereign nations in New Mexico. There was only one woman, and everyone came from central New Mexico.
Yes, Leonard, you have observed the work of the Arizona Independent Redistricting Body. Does that function pretty well, in your opinion? It's a totally different model. But its independence is something that Hannah's group has been pushing for. How do you think it works in Arizona?
It depends on exactly what independence that you're seeking. I think the people in Arizona back in the year 2000 initiated a proposition in which the redistricting would be taken away from the legislature, and that there would be an independent commission established to draw those lines and have the full authority to approve those redistricting plans. Now, there's no independence from the political gerrymandering aspects, even in this independent redistricting commission. But there's some vast differences between Arizona and New Mexico. I always believe that New Mexico is antiquated. It's behind times. New Mexico uses this huge collection of population that's referenced to precinct boundaries. Precinct boundaries are for voting purposes. It's not for population and redistricting.
Right. And what you're pointing to here is something that voters in Albuquerque probably don't really notice. But when you get out to the Navajo Nation, then you realize these lines feel much more arbitrary, right?
Correct. And the Navajo Nation does things different from what the counties do. So when you draw county precinct boundaries on the Navajo Nation, there is an element of disenfranchising Navajo voters because you specifically intentionally not draw precinct boundaries along Navajo political boundaries. But the legislature was helpful in the last session by passing House Bill 4, in which now it's required that the counties respect, for example, the Navajo chapter boundaries. But back to the differences between Arizona and New Mexico, Arizona uses what I consider a scalpel, like a surgeon does, very specifically cuts redistricting lines utilizing census blocks. However, on New Mexico, we use the chainsaw. And we pick up chunks of populations using precinct boundaries. That's really unfair to the voters in the state of New Mexico.
That's a great analogy. I really love the way you just put that. So using a scalpel to carve out these census blocks, the way that the U.S. Census puts people in little areas is quite precise, and you're able to group people together in communities of interest easier than if you use these precinct boundaries, which might be really large, and lump people in ways that they don't feel kin to people in the same lump. We chainsaw, you were saying. I love that.
Yeah, and basically who really does set the tone for redistricting is the county clerks. They set the tone for redistricting every decennial period.
Right. That makes those elections important too. Let me ask you to kind of wrap this up. Hannah, what is next? What are we going to see next in this lawsuit that the Republicans have brought saying the Democrats unfairly politically gerrymandered the congressional district lines? What should we see next?
Well, what we will be seeing next is the written opinion. And then we'll be seeing how the district court judge applies that.
Okay, so he's going to have some rules set by the state Supreme Court for determining whether this is unfair or not.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And that'll come in the next few weeks. Leonard Gorman, what is next in the Navajo Nation's lawsuit against the San Juan County Commission saying they unfairly disenfranchised Navajo voters in that county? What happens next?
One of the most important part in any form of protecting voting rights is public education. It's important to educate the public how they're affected by these decisions that are made, not only at the state level, but also at the local level, such as the counties, such as the school boards. It's important to ensure that all voters, Navajo voters in particularly, particularly on the northwest quadrant of the state, where Indigenous peoples have a full opportunity to cast a ballot.